All right, let's build React Server components totally from scratch. If you've used Next.js, you've probably seen the app router, you've probably seen server components. And you might be wondering, do I have to use Next.js to use server components? Do they exist outside of the framework? Well, I'm here to show you how you could implement that yourself. We're gonna build a node server, we're gonna stream a server component to a browser, and we're even gonna figure out client components with that use client directive using bundler plugins. So, not messing around, this is an empty file, and we're gonna start by scaffolding out a simple node server. You could use Express or Koa or whatever you prefer. I like using Hano because it's just the simplest set of APIs to get a server running on localhost 3000. So let's start this guy up. I'll just run node server. It listens on the port, and you can see we get our beautiful hello server components message. So we have our server. Now we need the component. I'm going to head to this app folder here, and I'll just make page.jsx. It could be named any file that you want. I'm just following a convention you might know from the app router. So I'm going to create a basic page that shows the same hello message, hello server comps. And now we need to bundle this to run inside of our node server. I'll head back over here and create a build function. We're going to be using the ESBuild bundler. You could, of course, use Webpack or Rollup or something else, but I really like ESBuild because the plugin system is really easy to use, and it's backed by Golang, so it's really fast to compile everything. We're going to run ESBuild right here, and we're going to pass in a little bit of server-specific config. So we're going to bundle all of our components as ESM or modules, and we're going to take that page.jsx, output it to a build folder. And we're going to add some utils as well for mapping the build folder and the app paths, because there's one thing that'll derail a demo, it's node file paths. So we're just going to have these utilities to use throughout our app. Build to the build folder, and up here, I'll add a build to the start of our dev server, just to make sure we always start with something fresh. Now I'll rerun our server, and we should see a build folder with our compiled JS output. So now it's ready to import a node. No, we're not using Dino or Bun. I know that those can handle JSX, but we're sticking with node, okay? I wanted to keep it simple. All right, now that we have our build output, let's go ahead and render it on our server. You can import this module directly. So I'll say page equals await import, and we'll go straight into the build folder and grab that page.js. And how do you render this? Well, you probably just use render to string, right? I mean, we've been rendering on the server forever, so I'll just call render to string. I'll say that's the HTML, render to string, and this is going to be a create element to use the React APIs. Take that default export and return some HTML using this little HTML utility from Hano. All right, so if we just restart our server and we render that out, we should see a hello message with an H1. All right, thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Wait a minute. I think there's more to server components than just rendering HTML. So first off, of course you can render React to HTML. We've been doing that on the server for many years now. But there are some special server component features that we also want. For example, if we wanted to add some client components in here, we want a way to jump from server-rendered HTML to client-side JSX, depending on which component we're using. And we also want to handle suspense. So let's say, for example, we're building an album viewer, something like Spotify, and we want to import all of these albums from some database call somewhere. And if that takes a long time, maybe we want to show a loading skeleton while that's streaming in, and then hot swap that loading spinner once the HTML is available. So you could use something like React Suspense for this, wrap it around our albums, and this will show loading until the albums are ready from the server. So putting database calls in your component, using async await, wrapping with suspense, these are all new features that require HTML streaming. So let's implement streaming. React themselves expose React Server DOM with your bundler of choice. Believe it or not, Webpack will actually work fine for ESBuild, so we'll import from there. And this gives you a suite of utilities in order to, for example, render a stream. So we can say, now let's take out this stream here, and we'll say React Server DOM, render to readable stream, and we'll pass in our same component from before. And because streams are a browser standard, you can return a web standard response object. This isn't next response. This isn't express response. This is just response, TM. Go look it up on the MDN docs. And you can pass through to stream and your browser will know to keep fetching new stream results until everything is over the wire. So now that we have this, we can actually look at the stream in action. I'm going to use curl like a caveman in order to show y'all what the raw output is first. So I'll widen this out a bit since there's a lot coming in. First, you'll see this H1 stream into view, and then a little bit later, once the database call is done, we get the rest of the results. So you see heading, then a second later, the rest of the components. And we can actually understand this output. First, you can see some, not HTML, but instructions to go render an H1 with hello server components. We'll render that loading spinner. Then you see this little L2 reference here. This is saying as soon as a new stream result comes down the wire with the ID of 2, I want you to hot swap the loading spinner with that new JSX. So you can see here, number 2 comes down a little bit later. It has the UL, the list, and you can see all the artist information in here. You see Lady Gaga somewhere in there, Glass Animals. Those are all of the album results we render into a list. But if we look at this in the browser right now, it's just a big wall of text. It's not HTML. The browser doesn't know what to do with it. And that's because server components actually aren't server only. It's a bit of a misnomer. It's actually this full stack framework to first stream components over to wire, and then client side, pick up that stream, turn it into HTML, so do the JSX virtual DOM conversion, and then plop it on the page. So we built part 1, streaming server components from a server. Now we need part 2 in order to translate that server stream into something the browser can understand. So the server sent the puzzle pieces. Let's assemble that puzzle. So let's update our server endpoints to allow some client-side logic. I'm actually going to move this server component endpoint to another namespace. I'll call it /RSC, server components. And then I'm going to turn our home page into a plain old HTML document. So down here, I'll return some HTML using Hano's HTML utility. And this is going to be pretty standard fare. It's just a HTML template with a doc type, a title, some tailwind so we can play with styles. And these are the 2 important lines. We have div with an ID of root. This is where our server component stream is going to render. And we have this module in order to read that stream and put it into the div. It's called _client, just a naming convention I came up with. And we're going to load that straight from our build directory. So let's go ahead and write that _client file first. So right here we have our create root, which is the same way you've created a React tree for, however many years. And we also have React Server DOM now with the client-side package. So this is the full stack story. We have a create from fetch utility that's able to fetch from a server and convert all the results from JSX to something React can use. So let's go ahead and create our root element. This is going to be the element with an ID of root, and we'll create our actual component root right here. Then we'll do create from fetch right here, and this creates from a fetch call to a server. So we'll call /RSC, that endpoint that we moved over to a little bit earlier. And then whenever a component comes down the wire, whenever a stream result is available, tell the root to render that new component, that new streamed server component. Now we need to bundle this file so that we can load it into the browser. We're going to update our ES build down here with some added config. We could add on to those entry points above, but there's some client-specific config that I want to add in here. So you can see we're still going to bundle all our endpoints. We're going to make sure that they're modules, but now we're going to look at that _client file, going to put it in the build folder, and we're going to avoid the package external up here because we need to bundle our npm packages as well so the browser is able to use them. So let's go ahead and restart our server. Now we see _client plopping into view, and we need to expose our build folder on the network so that the browser is able to import it. We said go to /build, but we actually need to expose that. Let's go ahead and call use. So anytime you go to /build/star on our server, I want to serve up those JavaScript files as static assets. And there's this great utility from Hano called serve static. This is, as you might have guessed, serve a static set of assets for any request to the build folder. Now we'll go ahead and restart our server to make sure those assets are available. We'll open our browser. Now you see hello server components loading. and then our beautiful view of all of these unstyled albums. But you can see it's working. You can also see the loading spinner right here before the results are available. Just to clean it up though, I'm gonna, add some movie magic for all the styles. I don't want you to watch me vertically center a div, but trust me, I know CSS. If we restart this, sure enough, we should get a styled list of albums with the number of songs, the title, and the album cover. All right, so we did what PHP has been doing for decades. But what about the thing React was designed for? Client-side interactivity. How do we add client components? Well, you kind of do it the same way you always have. So we'll create a file called like.jsx, for example, because we want to add a like button to our list of albums to say, I want to like it. We'll track it with some useState and show you a nice heart icon. If we add a like button to this page, you can see simple useState call, and on click, update the likes. You've seen counters all over the place. The one interesting part is this use client decorator. This is something our bundler picks up on to say anytime I find a component in the tree that starts with use client, I'm actually going to split that out to a separate build. And here's a little whiteboard explainer to show you the breakdown of how this is going to work. Thanks, Ben at the desk. Say we're rendering a server component tree. We walk down from the top, we stream results wherever we need to, and then we hit a client component. What are we supposed to do? Well, we have a bundler at our disposal, ESBuild, so we're going to walk through the tree with that bundler, and when we hit a client component, we're going to store some information, like tag it with the type, so when we hit that function, it knows it's a client component, and also store an ID to have some metadata. For example, the lookup ID, so we can go to the server and fetch that component bundle, and also the export name, so we grab the correct export out of that bundle. We'll store all of this into a component map, a big old JavaScript object, and we'll pass that off to our server stream, so whenever it hits a client component, it knows what to do. So let's jump into the code. We'll head back to our server, and we're gonna update our build in order to detect all of these changes. And for that, we're gonna use a plugin. And we're gonna call this Resolve Client Imports. This is gonna look for any .jsx import in a file. For example, if we wanted to import the like button here, we would probably say like so, and we would say, whenever you find that .jsx file, go ahead and read the file contents. So contents, await read file from node promises. And if the file contents starts with use client, and we're using single quotes here, but make sure people who use double quotes are also supported in your production-ready app. Go ahead and treat this as an external module. So we'll say, this is actually external. I don't want you to bundle it yourself. And the path is going to be that relative path with the JSX replaced with the built.js file. So the same way we have an underscore client.js, we're about to have all of our client component.js. So like.js will appear inside of this folder. And we're going to bundle that separately. So let's keep track of all the client components that we found along the way. At the start, we'll have client entry points, and that's going to be a set. Sets remove duplicates. It's like an array with superpowers. And down here, we'll say add into the entry points this path that we just discovered. Then down here, where we're doing our client build, let's go ahead and spread all of those entry points. And we're also going to turn off file writes because we want to do a little post-processing on the file before we go ahead and build it. So this is all the output files that ESBuild is about to write. And for each one of those, we're going to go ahead and say for each file, first read all of the exports in the file in order to see all of the components that might be inside there. Because remember, you can export as many components as you want in React. For that, we're going to use a really nice module called ESModule_Lexer. This is, again, a Go-based compiler. You notice that I really love Go. It's fast, okay? And this is going to go through the file, look for all the export statements, and tell us the export names, so we don't have to do all the regexing ourselves. Down here, I'll say, here are all the exports. I'm going to parse the file's text contents. And I'm going to update that text contents in a moment. I'll just create a mutatable variable to make sure we can do that. Now, I'll loop over all the exports in the file. And, well, I'm not going to do that copilot, but I am going to look at the export name, and I'm going to generate a unique key for that component map we alluded to in the whiteboard demo. So this is just a unique identifier for a component in our app. And one unique identifier might be the file path, plus the export name. You could also generate a random hash, whatever you want to do. And we're going to have a map of all the client components in our app for our server stream to reference. I'll make that a global. Don't use globals at home. I just know what I'm doing, so I'm going to make it global. It's the easiest way to get to a scrappy prototype. First, make it work, then make it good. Down here, I'm going to pass in the client component map so that while we're streaming, we have all the information about the client components in that tree. And we're going to append to that set down here. So client component map at that key is going to have some metadata. So first off, the ID of that component is going to be the path on our server where that component exists. Take from the build folder that file path, so /build/like.js, for example. And we're also going to say grab the export name out of there. We're going to turn off chunks. This is like a Webpack specific feature, and without this, it breaks the build. Just don't worry, we're turning off Webpack. And we're going to say async true. That's because we're going to import this component over the network as soon as it hits our browser. So async imports should be used. And then we're going to add some file contents just to tell our build all the information about this component. So I'm going to add on to the file, and I'm going to tag all of the components that we find. So for every component name, we're going to add a type of property. This is a special property, so we're going to use simple for, and it's called React Client Reference. So anytime React finds a component function with a special $$ type of property, it looks inside and says, oh, that's a client component. I need to treat this guy differently. Can you tell me some more information about this component? Sure can. We're going to say $ID, and this is the reference to that map that we created. So it knows, oh, okay, I'm going to go look up inside of that map this key, and I'm going to see I need to import over the network this component with this export name, and I'm going to do it asynchronously. Got it. I'll import that browser side, and I'll render that component as a client-side React component. So that's everything we need on the build side. Just got to make sure to write that file to the file system. So I'll say write file at the file path, new contents. And we can also see over here in our build that like was tagged with the type of and this little ID in order to look up all the information about it. So now let's go ahead and start up our server, see what we're working with. And we should see getting albums, and then it blows up. But this is an expected error, I hope. Yes, it is. So we can see right here, Webpack require is not defined. And that's because Webpack is not really friendly with browser standards. We need to add one little monkey patch that I added to my clipboard, Webpack hack. This is a mapper to say anytime you try to go to the window in order to import a module, don't do that. Just look at the ID and import it straight from the server. If you didn't know, you can run import inside of your browser. Imports are a web standard now. You don't need bundlers necessarily. So we're saying, yeah, just do a web standard import. This is going to be /build/like button dot whatever. And that should be available inside of your browser once that's ready. Now our server is able to, pull up all the information, renders out the albums, and sure enough, it imported React over to Wire to hydrate that use state. Really nice. So it's kind of the end of my demo to show y'all rendering to a server stream and handling client imports. Of course, there's a lot more that we didn't cover, like server actions. What are those? Stop asking questions. I don't know what they are. And also, turning this into an actual application. Right now, we're just rendering one route, but how could you set up multiple routes? Or how could you send, server-side requests in order to do a search box, send a query param, re-render the server component? If you're wondering about those, I have a YouTube video that I recorded with Dan Abramov, the inventor of React. Okay, he's not actually the inventor of React, but you might know him as one of the big React creators. And we had a big, long 4-hour stream where we walked through all of the inner workings of server components. So if you want to see an interview with Dan, that's at the beginning. If you want to scrub to this chapter about building a search box or building your own router, definitely invite you to do that, to go further and learn a little more about server components. Otherwise, you can just go install this repo, bhomesdev/simplersc. You can clone it, run it yourself, and build from there in order to build your own hacked-together server component server. All right, so if you enjoyed this, be sure to like and subscribe. I do this content every week, usually as short form on my whiteboard, but trying to do some more long form content, so expect that in the future. All right, I'll see you in the next one.